about now. So on behalf of Bryant's Alumni Association, welcome to the second of our series of webinars this fall. Yes, we are. Designed to share alumni professional expertise with Bryant graduates and students. Before I turn the program over to our presenter, Diane Wilbur, and our facilitator, Robin Ward, I need to provide you with some ground rules for today's webinar, which will last for 1 hour. All participants are in a listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to comment and ask questions using the question and answer feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. After today's presentation, you'll receive a survey. Take a moment to provide your feedback, as your comments are valuable as we expand our professional development programs for alumni. Now I'll turn the program over to Robin Ward, Director of Alumni Engagement at Bryant University. She's a 30-plus year veteran of higher education and has found her passion developing meaningful ways to connect alumni back to their alma mater. Her office informs alumni through integrated communications, involves alumni to ensure student success, and promotes alumni leadership and innovation through creative programming. Take it away, Robin.
Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks. And thanks, everyone. Looks like we've still got people logging on as I speak, but I'm very happy to be here moderating. This is my first time moderating. As many of you know who've done these webinars with us, we started this program last year. They've been incredibly successful, and we're thrilled to bring you programming. Make sure that you do let us know if you've got any ideas for future topics. We'll give another plug at the end. But today I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Diane Wilbur. I had the opportunity to meet Diane last year. She stepped forward when we started this. She's a 1988 graduate of Bryant. She's also an executive career coach, a keynote speaker, and a leadership consultant. And she's absolutely passionate about helping others make an impact and achieve their personal best. She's a certified coach with Personal Branding Company and Soft Skills Training Group. She also provides customized corporate programs on personal branding, executive presence, and emotional intelligence. Her client list ranges from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies, and she's had the pleasure of working with Fidelity, American Century, AIG, EMC Corporation, Charles Schwab, ING, now Voya, right, and TJX Company. So I'm very happy to turn the microphone over to Diane and today's presentation on body language, the secret to building executive presence. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Tim.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin and Tim. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. I'm very excited to share with you a sample of my executive presence program that really focuses specifically on body language. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We will have time at the end as well. And if you are interested in the full program, I'll provide you with some contact information at the end. So, executive presence, it's gaining a lot of attention. It's really a term that's as elusive as the term charisma. It's a set of learned behaviors that really enables you to command attention. So let's take a look at today's objectives. Today we're going to cover what is executive presence and why it's become so critical to be successful in today's marketplace. We're going to take a look and a focus on particular body language, some strategies that help you strengthen your overall executive presence. And then finally, we're going to highlight throughout the presentation some common mistakes and errors that we see that can negatively impact your executive presence. You know, some people have this naturally, but others can gain it. I do think that you can improve your executive presence by working on your strengths. I see this all the time working with clients that I coach. And really it's about developing your social and emotional intelligence. You know, we spend so much time focused on gaining our technical and functional skills, and in the end we spend very little time focused on these critical soft skills. But before we get started, we wanted to launch a quick poll. I am very excited about the tremendous turnout today, but I'd like to get an idea of what your main objective for the webinar is. We generally see clients in one of three of these categories. Those who are looking to get promoted to the next level. Some of you may be searching for a new role and looking to strengthen your executive presence. And then some of you may be looking to just strengthen your current skills in your role. So if take a minute, Tim's going to launch a quick poll, and then we're going to get started.
The poll has been launched. We're just waiting for some folks to vote. We're about 67% of the attendees voting right now. So once we hit about 80%, we'll close it up and we'll share the results.
Okay, great. So Tim, while they're filling out the poll, I will mention there's a ton of great resources out there on both executive presence and body language. We can share some of that at the end. But really, one of the best resources that you have at your fingertips is getting feedback from some trusted colleagues along the way. So keep that in mind as we go through the presentation today.
So it looks like the results are in, and strengthening my skills in my current role seems to have won with about 64%.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, that's really helpful in tailoring some of the comments here. And again, I encourage you to send over your questions so we can address those throughout the presentation. So what I want you to think about is a recent meeting. Was there somebody there that seemed to attract everyone's attention? Somebody that we admire, somebody that we are passionate about. Think of that person. You know, the myth has been that you either have this executive presence or you don't. And like I mentioned earlier, it comes naturally to some of us, but we can all get it. So what is it? Basically, it's what we call gravitas. It's the wow factor. It's really the ability to command a room when you walk into it. Do you know who's in charge? Do people stop and listen to when you speak? And do you have that ability to influence others and project confidence and communicate clearly? All of these components together bring together what we refer to as the wow factor. You know, a lot of people aren't clear on it, but it really boils down to three things. First, how you act. You know, how you act at work, how you act in meetings with professionals, how you carry yourself. The other part of it is how you look. Although this has the least amount of impact on executive presence, it's still very important. And if there are some major mistakes, they could be very detrimental to your EPA. And then finally, it's how you communicate. And communication it comes in three forms. It's your oral communication, it's your written responses, and it's really your nonverbals, which is what we're going to talk about today, your overall body language. When you think of these three areas, it's really a dynamic mix that creates the overall quality of what we call the wow factor. So Diane, the wow factor.
Diane, excuse me, it's Robin here. I've
Sure.
got one quick question that I think we can, you might be able to cover, but I want to give it to you now. We have a listener, an alumna, who has some clients who are introverts. And so this presence in a room is very hard for them. So as you go forward, if you could touch specifically on, you know, sort of that natural introvert that, you know, sometimes appears in all of us, I think. So thank you.
No, thank you for the question. And it's an excellent question I hear all the time. So I'll address it on this next slide, actually. When you think about the wow factor and you think about influencing others, it doesn't necessarily come down to having that large persona. It really does come across with poise and confidence. So when you think about people, whether they're extroverts or introverts, when you think about influence, it's really being able to put people at ease, approachability, and you can do that as an introvert as well. Projecting poise and confidence. You know, think about people who never get flustered, people who are constantly in control. Again, you don't need to be an extrovert to fall into that category. Many introverts do as well. You know, it's having a high level of emotional intelligence. EQ has gotten so much press, and rightfully so. It's a skill that we all need, and it falls into both camps as well. EQ is really being in tune with your own behaviors and how your behaviors impact others, and really picking up on some social cues along the way, you know, and how that will impact your overall relationship with people. It also includes being able to work well under pressure. You know, in times of crisis, these people generally have a strong sense of calm. And then, again, you know, communicating with authority. It's really critical to communicate in a very clear and concise manner. We often look at weak words and phrases and try to eliminate them. For example, you know, in a lot of the classes I teach, we have a list of weak words, and a lot of times we start off with "I think," or "I may be wrong, but," and those are self-sabotaging words that take away from the message that we're trying to convey. So when you think about all of those things together, we could spend, you know, 8 hours on an influence class or emotional intelligence, and today is just really a fraction of what we're talking about, and we're really going to take a hard look at body language and how it impacts overall executive presence.
Diane,
so
we and for the audience, we did a session last year on emotional intelligence, and so if you want to, you can go back to our archives and review that, because as Diane said, you could spend a whole session just on that one bullet point. So I just wanted to point that out. Thanks, Diane. I'll let you go on to who has it, huh?
No, thank you, Robin. And again, the archives present a lot of great information and resources, so I'm happy to point that out as well. There's a ton of information up there, so when you get a chance, definitely check it out. So moving along, in terms of who has it, when you think about people, think about your peer group, think about your boss, maybe a mentor, a colleague, think about your friends. These people come to mind very quickly, the folks that do have it. And then who doesn't have it? You know, who's in that camp that should have it, that doesn't have it? I've provided you with some celebrity samples. You know, when you take a look at Nancy Reagan, she brought both elegance and class to the White House. I don't think anybody would dispute that she has overall executive presence. I put George Clooney up there. You know, he's really known for his overall charm. He's incredibly stable and very level-headed. That's the kind of reputation that he has in the marketplace. And with respect to Lady Di, you know, she's got those attributes of being elegant, but she's also brave and very kind-hearted. That's what her legacy stood for. And then MLK, Martin Luther King, he's very inspirational, committed to a cause, but he's very brave and outspoken. And then we've got our friend Barbara Walters, who is known as being very relentless, fearless. As we know, she's a reporter, and really was a trailblazer for women. And then finally, Oprah, who ends up in a lot of my PowerPoints, she's got a very high emotional intelligence, the ability to connect with people in all levels. She's respected worldwide for her philanthropic work, and she's totally relatable. So I think all of these are great examples of people who have executive presence, but I want you to think about who in your world has it and who sets himself apart, and how do you get more of that? You know, I was looking at Generation Y versions of this, and the one person that I would probably come up with would be Mark Zuckerberg. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, as you know, who's a 26-year-old founder of Facebook, you know, he's wearing a t-shirt and jeans most of the time. But that is acceptable in his world, and he has the overall executive presence where he's got that wow factor. He walks into a room, people listen, he's got the ability to influence others, he's created quite a following. So he would be the one person I would point out for the Generation Y. And then finally, you know, I was thinking about political candidates. I was thinking about our presidential candidates. For obvious reasons, I didn't include them, but you know, you can have a lot of fun with that as well. A lot of them have it. Some of them have what we would call presence. I don't know that we would term it executive, but they have quite a presence. But there are several people out there that would fit into that category as well. So when you think about executive presence, why do we need it? Why do we care? Well, it's not like when our parents were in the workforce. Hard work and results alone won't get you to the next level. And I think we can all agree with that. The soft skills have become very critical in today's marketplace. It's really important to have this skill, whether you're currently in the C-suite or not. I know we have a lot of people on the line who are executives, CEOs, we've got vice presidents, but you don't need to be at that level to start learning some of the basics, because it can impact your career in a very strong way, both on a positive level and a negative level. So our definition here is executive presence is really rated as the #1 most important skill to becoming an effective leader. It really surpasses what we have seen in the past, which was technical and functional expertise. Leaving school, I've had the pleasure of being in front of a lot of college-age kids here too, and they're asking a lot about, what are employers looking for? Well, I can say that, the functional and the technical skills will get you in the door, but it's really that personal brand, that executive presence that's going to keep you there and really get you to that next level. So the impact is real. I want you to think about a situation that you've been in which maybe somebody in your organization got promoted recently. Maybe it was you. This person competed with other qualified candidates. And you scratch your head and you say, why did that person get the role and others didn't? And honestly, it often comes down to executive presence, one person having it over the others. And I've got this quote here, research from the Center of Talent Innovation, and executive presence really is being perceived as leadership material. In today's day and age, you need this because it will account for a little bit more than 1/4 of what it takes to get promoted. And that's a big number. So it's critically important. The impact is very real, and it's something that we should all take note of. So on the next slide, I do a lot of work with communication, and I tend to include this in all of my communication workshops, but I thought it was critically important to include it here as well. Although executive presence is something that you earn over time, I do think that the first impression makes a huge difference. And we've all heard the expression, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and that's really true. It becomes very critical. It's a critical component of building your executive presence and managing these first impressions. So think about the image that you want to convey. Do your actions really reinforce this image? Do you have the ability to build relationships? These first impressions can really make or break a presentation you're doing, a meeting that you're in, a sale that you're trying to make, in your overall career. First impressions are lasting, and it really, you're an extension of the company, so it's an impression of you personally, but it's further reaching, because if you're representing a corporation, that first impression is really about the company as well.
Diane, it's Robin here again.
Sure.
I can't help but think, I don't have a question right now, but as I'm listening to this, so many of our listeners want to get ahead in their own jobs, and indeed that was what I clicked on as being something that was important to me. So many of us don't have a chance to remake that first impression. So as you go along here, if you have any advice for how we, and maybe it is just at a meeting or something, how we can sort of polish our own image where we're already working, and to think about ways that that we can, get past those first impressions that we might have created years before, and show people that we're ready for the next step. So that's just a thought that I had.
Okay, yeah, that's a great one. Okay, awesome, and I'll address that with this slide as well. when you think about first impressions, they're not to be discounted. And as you mentioned, Robin, like it could have been a first impression from a month ago, a year ago, several years ago. But studies have shown two things. They're very accurate. And, you know, our personal assessments are accurate and they're remarkably true. The other thing that is worth noting is once people have formed the impression of you, they tend to disregard any information that's inconsistent. And I'll give you an example. And for all the women out there, you can probably relate. If you go into a dressing room and you're trying on a new outfit, and you didn't really ask for anyone's opinion, but salespeople tend to give it to you anyway. And you put something on, and you know it doesn't really look that great, but you've got the salesperson in the store saying, wow, that looks unbelievable, that looks great. In your mind, you know it doesn't look so great. It doesn't look great at all. In fact, you might even think you're a hot mess. But this person is trying to convince you it looks good. So you've already discounted this person to be truthful. That first impression is reliant upon what that person has said to you. So if you put on another outfit and it does look good and you think it looks good and she says it looks good, you're going to discount that going forward. And that happens in business situations as well. If somebody is not truthful with you or they're giving an impression that is lasting, anything that they do afterwards is very hard to overcome. So, Rob, when you think about, you know, a first impression that you may have had several years ago, several months ago, or several minutes ago that you could take back, or you might not even be aware of it, I will say that it's very difficult because these are lasting impressions, but the first part of it would be to get some feedback. What was that first impression? What was negative about it? How can you improve? And once you get a clear understanding of what that is, you should make a conscious, consistent effort over a 30, 60, 90-day period to focus on that one particular thing. A great example would be if you had a first impression of somebody who entered your office and they seemed disorganized. You know, in your mind, that person's already, you know, classified as disorganized. And if that person got the feedback and they understood that that was the message that they were conveying, every single thing that they should do going forward to unwind that would be to be organized. You know, show up early, take notes, do everything that they could possibly do to convince you and to make you understand that they are not, in fact, organized and you know, they were just probably having a bad day. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. And actually, that's a good suggestion that to get that feedback, because I do think some of us are in our positions for a number of years, and you know, it's hard to ask for feedback, and I think that's absolutely critical. And I think, you know, taking it one step at a time, whether it's in a meeting or it's you know, presenting to a group, you know, how did I do? Asking for that feedback. So that's great. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And, you know, we could do another session on feedback, but I think the key for that as well is let people know that you're open to feedback. Because generally speaking, it's hard to ask for it and it's hard to deliver it as well. Even some of the best managers I work with are very gun-shy about giving constructive feedback. So let them know what you're working on. Hey, you know what, there's a perception out there in the marketplace that I'm disorganized. Is that true? Have you seen that? Are there any great examples you can share with me? What would you do about it? And let them know that you're open, and I think that would help change that overall first impression. Okay, so moving along, some of you may be familiar with what we call the 7-11 rule. And basically what this is in the first 7 seconds, we subconsciously form 11 impressions about someone. And this came out of research from NYU a number of years ago. And what they discovered is this happens so fast, we're not even aware that we're doing it. Take a look at the 11. You know, we judge people subconsciously on their education level, their level of experience, how credible they are, how successful they may be, political and religious views, their level of trustworthiness, sophistication, sexual orientation, their ethnicity, and finally their social and professional desirability in the marketplace. It's amazing that we do this, and it's unconscious, but it's something to be aware of, because if this happens so quickly and we think about those first impressions, again, it comes back to, that's part of your overall executive presence, how you enter a room, and how you're judged, and what are some of those things that people are judging you on. Okay, so we have another quick listener poll. When you think about executive presence, I want to think about what goes into that. A lot of that goes into it, and I talked earlier about some of those things that are involved in the wow factor. Think about somebody who has it, and think about, what's the biggest impact on our EP? Is it the actual words that we use? Is it the nonverbal signals that we give out? Or is it really the overall tone of your voice when communicating? We'll give you a quick second to take a look at that.
So we're just waiting for some folks to vote. We're about 69, about 70% right now. Once we get to about 80%,
Tim,
we'll close it out and share the post.
It's
yes.
Robin. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Tim, we actually have a housekeeping question, and you may be the person to answer this. We have a question that asks if we're going to receive these slides. And,
yes, we are.
I know I mentioned the archive, but yes. So do we share the slides or just the link?
We do. At the end of the presentation, we'll be able to share those in a follow-up email.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. So let me just close out this poll, and we'll share the results. And it looks like nonverbal signals is coming in at 55, but the tone of your voice when communicating is second with 40%.
Okay, great. Well, I think the topic of today's presentation was a great giveaway. So all of you got it right. It is, in fact, your nonverbals. It is the power of the body language, which represents 55%. When you think about communication, there's a lot that goes into it, and we tend to spend so much time fretting over the words that we're going to use, but it really only represents about 7% of the impact of our message. The tone of voice represents about 38%, and then finally body language accounts for most of it. So again, this is your overall impact on the message, the words that you're trying to convey, and the overall body language is the most powerful of all of those. So here's what we know about body language. It will show others how confident you are, or if you're not. It's also going to show others your interest level or your level of engagement. And it's also going to show if your body language confirms your words. It's great if it does, but if it contradicts your words, we tend to believe what we see and not what we hear. And then finally, it builds trust. So let's talk about micro expressions. On the screen here, you've got 7 of them, or actually 6 of them. These are things that are very difficult to control. There's based on Paul Ekman's research, there are 7 universal microexpressions. These are things that happen in 1/15 or a quarter of a second. They're involuntary, they're very brief, they're hard to control, but they're very helpful in understanding the emotions of somebody that you're conversing with. And these are things that people judge you on as well. So the 7 universal microexpressions are disgust, anger, fear, sadness, happiness, surprise, and contempt. And you wear these, and they're hard to hide from. When you look at interviews on the news, when you look at expressions of people that are in meetings, it's hard to unravel what they're trying to say if you can catch these micro expressions. You see these all the time on the news, Tim and I were talking earlier about just different interviews, and generally speaking, if somebody is nodding their head in agreement but they're saying no, you tend to think that they're lying because their expressions are not congruent with what they're saying. So these are things to be mindful of. There are things that you can control in terms of facial expressions. I think I skipped over one of the slides here. You're smiling. You can control that. This tends to make you more likable. But I'd be cautious of that, because if you're smiling too much, it gives the perception to others that you're not authoritative looking, you're not serious. So smile more, but just not all the time and not in every situation. As far as eye contact, this is something within your control as well. Generally speaking, it's a 40-60 ratio that you want to be looking somebody in the eye. If you're staring them down 100%, that's kind of weird as well. You know, people don't want that. And if you're not making any eye contact at all, you know, you send the message that, you know, people are not trusting what you're saying. We looked at microexpressions, and then this term emotional contagion. Basically what this means is being mindful of your mood, your state of mind, because you wear that on your face. You know, if you're having a bad day, you know, if you're running late to a meeting, if you woke up late, you spilled coffee on yourself, whatever it is, you tend to wear expressions on your face. So be very mindful of your state of mind, because I think this becomes very obvious to everybody. Okay.
I have a quick question here, Diane, too. And this,
sure.
Before we go too much further, I think this is a couple slides back now. It's just it is the statistics that are showing that that it's not so much what the information is, but how you're broadcasting it. And one of our alums asks, and I think it's an interesting question. He says, you know, basically, is it the liver of any information is in the broadcasting? I mean, you know, aren't some people actually listening to what people say? Are you
talking about this slide here, Robin?
I think so. I think that's about, the question came through right after that, and it's basically, you know, just wondering, you know, how is there any information that people actually listen to, or is there any research that, or is so much of it on what's being broadcast that it's not the message, it's how it's coming across. So again, I think I'm interpreting the question right, but you know, I guess we want to think that people do listen to what we have to say, but perhaps it's a combination of all three.
Yeah, and that's exactly true. It is all three, and I think what this slide really represents is the fact that your words do matter. And we spend a lot of time on word selection and word choice and trying to be articulate. But what is outweighing the word selection in terms of the impact to the audience is both the tone of your voice and how that message and how those words are conveyed, and also your like your gestures and all of the body language that goes along with that. Yeah. You know, you could have a very compelling PowerPoint presentation, or you know, be in front of a meeting, and you could have great words, but if the tone of your voice isn't engaging where people are going to listen, and your enthusiasm and your passion for the topic and your gestures are not aligned with that, you're not going to get the same impact that you would otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's good. I have another question here, and you can choose to handle it later if it'll come in. But one of our alums is saying that much of her interaction is with leaders that in a virtual. She's interacting with them virtually, and if we're going to address how to build executive presence in a virtual environment, so I assume emails, messages, or perhaps teleconferences. I'm not sure if it's all of the above.
Right. Well, that's a fantastic question. There's so many jobs that are going remote nowadays. There's quite a big population out there that works from their homes or they're, remote salespeople. So terrific question. Obviously, they can't see your body language through the phone. I think people are using more of Skyping and webinars and, trying to get their face across. But irrespective of that, if that's not an option, then clearly the tone of voice would be something that you want to really focus on. And we can address that throughout as well in terms of being remote, but it does present a particular challenge for those who are not face-to-face. And I would focus more on the tone of voice as opposed to body language. And, look for opportunities along the way where you can do some Skyping and, get your face out there and, try to do more things that are more interpersonal. Okay, I gotta go back. Okay, so, in most business situations, it's very customary to shake hands. I've got this in here. It's usually a really fun topic when we do our in-live sessions. But, in essence, it really forms an instant connection with who you're meeting with. As far as people, they're really more likely to remember you. And when you look at the next slide, we're hoping that they'll remember you in a very positive way. So let's take a look at some of the handshake positions. I typically have people do this in class. Take a look at the first one, which is taking control. This is in a situation where you're actually putting your hand on top of someone else's. So you're dominating, and these things tend to send very subtle messages. The one in the middle is when your hand is on the bottom of the handshake, and that represents you're giving up control to the other person. The one to the far right is shaking hands. This is equal in parity. This is something that we normally do. You're in any given situation, this is probably what we're striving for. And then finally on the bottom, we call this the glove handshake. This is really only used when you're very familiar or close with someone, or you're offering comfort to someone. These are pictures I'm just having a lot of fun with, and in the very top here, again, we do this in person. I generally have people do what we call the wet fish. It feels very icky. People don't like it, and when you think about when you get this wet fish handshake, and a lot of women are guilty of this, I hate to say, or a lot of men are guilty of giving this to a woman. You walk away with an impression, and you have to ask yourself, what is that impression? But it's a lasting one. And when you look at the bone crusher, that's a lasting one as well. That's very memorable. I was actually at an open house this weekend for a school I was volunteering at, and a gentleman walked up to me and he crushed my hand. And I think I have a pretty good handshake. I was a little bit surprised and taken back. So we had a quick conversation. At the end of the conversation, he was going in for the handshake again, and I had to brace myself. Here we go. And he crushed it again. I can't say I remember this gentleman's name, but I can certainly remember his face, and I can remember that crushing handshake. We see this with politicians a lot. I've got a couple of pictures up here. One's a little bit blurry of Joe Biden, but take a look at the one with Bill Clinton. His hand is on the bottom. So, he's in the non-dominant, position. But in order to gain back that control, and politicians generally do this, he put his hand back on top. And look at the hand of the other person. It's tapping him on the arm. The same holds true with Joe Biden. He's got the upper hand, and we all hear that expression, but he also is tapping this gentleman on the back, and that's sending a subtle message to the other person. I'm in control. And these things you'll notice if you start looking at politicians, they do that all the time. They jockey for the left side. They want that photo op moment where their hand is on the top. And you see this in business situations as well. So I guess my advice to you is going back to the previous slide, you want to have equal parity. You want to shake a hand in a way that shows the other person that you're not taking over control, you're a partner, and that's a message you're trying to send across.
Diane, this is very interesting. We got more comments and questions about handshakes than anything so far. It seems to be a hot topic. Let me just tell you a couple of them. One alumna mentioned that a friend had taught her to use the glove to keep men from coming in for a hug in a business situation, so the glove handshake. Another one, an alumnus, so a man, comments that he shakes hands with women different from how he shakes hands with men. And so, you know, it tends to be, and my screen is acting up, so I can't see what's behind my questions right now. But that with women, he tends to hold their hand instead of shaking it. And so clearly, we've got some. Well, maybe we'll do an alumni networking event on shaking hands. So
that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, let me go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's all right. I've got something, but I'll bring it to the end.
Okay. Let me just comment on the gentleman who gives a handshake sort of lightly. And that's great. I think his intention is probably he doesn't want to be the bone crusher. But I would have to, from an executive coaching standpoint, I would coach that person to use a little bit more force and be a little bit more firm with the woman, because as a woman, if you're getting that kind of limp handshake, the wet fish, it's sending that woman a message that they're not in control and they're not worthy of a firm handshake and they can't handle it, and it's a little bit off-putting. So I would encourage that person to, you know, shake that person's hand, whether they're a man or a woman, the same way, because, you know, women want that, and it's more of a respectful thing. I would imagine that the intent isn't to be disrespectful or anything, you know, in terms of being negative, but you know, on being on the receiving end, it doesn't feel good. As far as the glove handshake, again, this is something you want to only do with people that you're very comfortable doing it with. You see this a lot at funerals. You know, people are being comforting and they're sending their condolences. It's kind of weird if you don't know the person very well if they're doing it, but I can also understand if you're preventing somebody from getting close, that might be a very effective means of doing that. And I hadn't heard that, so I think that that's probably some good advice. You know, there's a lot of huggers out there. I tend to be one of them, and not everybody's really comfortable with that. So, you know, I think I've picked up something that we can include in the presentation going forward. Okay, so yeah, I'm not surprised that we're getting a lot of questions on handshakes. When you think about body language, I think the #1 area of confusion for people is what do they do with their hands? And here are some good tips. You know, you want to create trust, so think about effective ways to create a sense of openness. You generally want to have your palms up and open, you know, particularly when you're speaking in front of a group. You want to have your gestures being very controlled, not wild and all over the place. As far as your arms, you want to raise them up a bit, but you don't want to go so high up that they're above your head. And then steepling. I'm going to show you some pictures on the next slide, but steepling is a very effective way to use your hands to show confidence. And then, honestly, if you don't know what to do with your hands, you can put them by your sides. There's nothing wrong with keeping your hands by your side. So here's some fun pictures we included in the presentation. The first shows openness. You see this a lot when people are presenting. It shows that they're trustworthy, they're giving you information, they're open to hearing feedback. A very, very effective means of communication. You see Steve Jobs, he's got his hands open as well. His gestures are very controlled, he's very focused. And then on the right side, you see a lot of different examples of what we call steepling. And steepling is very, very effective. You can do it in a number of ways. It could be like in the bottom picture here. It's a little bit of a pyramid. Hillary Clinton has it a little bit more of a prayer symbol. And then Barack Obama, it doesn't have him doing this in this photo, but you see a lot of photos of him using like a basketball steeple where he's taking his fingers and opening them up. So it's a combination of being open but also steepling. And it shows a level of confidence, and that another just effective means when you're working with groups. Okay, so let's point out some things that may impact your hand gestures in a negative way. The first and foremost is what we call the fig leaf. I'll show you an example of this on the next slide, but basically the fig leaf is using your hands to hide your private parts. The next one is pointing. When you're pointing, you tend to look overly aggressive. It could be off-putting. You'd want to be really careful with when and where you're pointing. One of the other self-sabotaging moves is what we call self-soothing gestures. You'll see people who are in interview situations or meetings who are constantly rubbing their arms, they're cracking their knuckles, they might be biting their lower lip. These are all considered self-soothing mechanisms. They're gestures that are really negatively impacting your overall presence with others in the room. You've got scratchers, people that tend to scratch their face, their head, their neck, their arms are scratching. That conveys a sense of nervousness and a need to pacify. And then, I put in crossing arms because I think it's kind of a myth out there. People interpret that as being closed. You're being closed off, you're not open-minded, you're not in agreement with the message that's being conveyed. But you need to be careful with that one, because when you think about crossing arms, it could be a sense of, you're in a meeting, you're crossing your arms because it's a comfortable position, and that's one that you generally do. It could be that the air conditioner is turned up full blast and you're cold. You could be totally engaged with what's going on in the meeting, but you're crossing your arms, and you know that you're engaged, but you need to be careful, because the myth out there is you may be sending that message to a person that you're not in agreement. So let's take a look at some things that you want to avoid. I mentioned pointing. When you look at the woman in the top left-hand corner, not only is she pointing, but you look at her facial expression. You have to ask yourself, what kind of message is she sending to the person who's trying to interrupt her? Probably not a very positive one. They're not walking away feeling good. The gentleman in the middle with his fist, generally speaking, you never want to have closed fists. It looks to me like he's conducting a meeting. If you're conducting a meeting, you're the leader, you're at the head of the table, you have to ask yourself, what are others thinking if I'm closing my fist? I look combative. That's a message I'm trying to send. This person indeed may be very passionate about what he's trying to do, but he's sending something, he's in for the fight, and you need to be very careful. The woman in the white t-shirt to the far right, this is what we call the fig leaf. She's trying to hide the private parts, and this goes back to primitive days when, you're feeling very uncomfortable, not confident, you want to revert, you want to hide, you want to run away. Animals do this, people do this, you tend to hide your private parts. This message is sending the world that she's very nervous, very subdued, and not comfortable with what's going on. We talked a little bit about crossing your arms. Not only is this gentleman crossing his arms, but he has that micro expression of contempt on his face, neither of which is a very good message that you want to be sending to whoever is watching you or conversing with you. We've got Bush in the middle, scratching his head. It doesn't really show a level of confidence. I'm not quite sure what he's speaking about, but it's going to detract from his overall message. And then finally, the gentleman in the bottom right-hand corner, again, another self-soothing mechanism. He's rubbing the back of his head. These are all things that we do all the time that we're not conscious of. But if you can just work on these little things, they can make the biggest impact on your executive presence. So just be mindful of that.
Diane, I think we're in good shape time-wise. We've got about 10 minutes left here. I did have a quick question. If it is possible for someone to gesture too much when they speak. Some of that. I think some gestures are positive and do give you more presence. So if we can touch on that, but I just wanted to give us the sort of the 10-minute warning as well.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. I know we've got a ton of information. I'm trying to talk fast, but we've had a lot of great questions throughout as well. And again, my contact information will be at the end, so if there's something that we didn't cover, feel free to reach out. So quickly, going through posture, as Robin pointed out, what are some of those positive things that we should be doing? Obviously, standing tall. This is something that I think we're all guilty of. Having a level head, we hear that expression all the time, but if we tend to be tilting our head, it could be sending different messages across. If you're tilting your head to the side, it could be that you're curious about something, but it could also be that you're uncertain and you're, not really in agreement with what the message is. We have something what we call the belly button theory and position of your feet. These two things go hand in hand, and basically what you want to be mindful of is where your feet are. We call it squaring off with someone. If you're talking with somebody in a situation, whether you're networking or face-to-face, you want to make sure that your feet are pointing towards the person that you're conversing with. If your feet are pointing towards the door or pointing towards another person, and again, your belly button doesn't lie because it's congruent with your feet, that's sending the message to the person that what you're saying to me isn't all that interested because my feet are pointed to the door and I'm one step out and I'm looking to get away from this conversation. So very, very mindful of your feet position. Chin level to the ground, basically what that means is, if it's pointing upwards, it could mean that you're bored. If it's pointing way upwards, it could be sending a message of arrogance, so make sure your chin is very level to the ground. We're going to be talking about taking up space in a second. And another, I guess, great thing to point out is walking with a purpose and confidence. You see this all the time. People that are in a hurry often look frazzled and disorganized. People who are slow look like they're unmotivated and, not passionate about what they're doing. And then removing physical barriers. Something that we all need to also think about is if you have a podium in front of you, are you walking around, are you working the room, are you hiding behind a coffee cup or a notebook or a binder? Try not to hide, try to put yourself out there. Okay, quickly, Amy Cuddy, who is a psychologist from Harvard, wrote a fantastic bestseller. Many of you are probably aware of it. It's called Presence. She talks about the power pose. We do this in our sessions. It's often really fun. You'll see that speakers getting ready for a presentation often do this before they go on stage. And basically, the research that Amy has shared with everybody in her book indicates that when you put yourself into a power pose like the one here, this actually increases your overall confidence. So if you're not feeling confident, if you stand up and you put yourself in this power pose, it actually stimulates testosterone, which is linked to power and dominance, and it really lowers cortisol, which is linked to your overall stress. And that's something that we can be doing day in and day out, and that's really, really easy. It has a huge impact on your overall presence. Okay, here's quickly some examples of poor body language. I think they're all very, explanatory, like looking at the posture and the expressions and, what you're doing with your hands. We covered this earlier. But I want to spend a couple of minutes on mirroring behavior because in executive presence situations, this is really critical. it is really the behavior in which one person subconsciously imitates gestures and speech patterns of another. I know you guys know what we're talking about. You know, according to some scientists, there's a neuron that affects part of our brain that's really responsible for the recognition of facial expressions. And this particular neuron causes the mirroring, or what we call copying, of actions of another person. It shows, you know, we want to show the other person, I'm like you. You know, we experience the same emotions. It's lasting. We're trying to build rapport. We're not trying to manipulate you, but these mirroring behaviors are very, very effective in all social situations. So here are some quick examples. When you look at Barack Obama, he's obviously at probably a basketball game, what he's doing with his hands. He's probably not even consciously doing this. It's just an imitation. People tend to do this, whether it's with their voice or their pace of their speech. It could be their moods. In these situations, it's their bodies. The folks in the meeting, look what they're doing with their hands. They're replicating each other. And then lastly, what you probably don't want to do is the bottom left hand, when somebody's putting their hands behind their head like that, putting their knee up on the table. That I put in there more or less as a trick, because that's a behavior that you probably don't want to be mirroring. It's so obvious that the other person is going to be aware of it, and it's not a particularly strong message. So be mindful of that as well. Okay, taking up space quickly because I know we're running out of time and I want to be mindful of your lunch hour. The more space that you take up shows overall confidence. I mentioned earlier we tend to shrink when we're not feeling confident. It's the reptile system that kicks in. We tend to retreat. We're looking for an escape. And you know, in all these situations, these are all sending out messages of confidence. And last but not least, we went over some of these things, but just an overall summary to leave you with, you know, some mistakes to avoid that will derail some of your executive presence. Basically, if you're making little or no eye contact, you want to be mindful of that. If you're fidgeting, we talked about self-soothing gestures. We tend to do this without even knowing it. If we're hiding our hands, folding our arms, the gentleman in the previous slide, I showed, you know, with her fist on the table, the woman pointing, and then poor posture. That's a strong one, and that's something that we can fix immediately. So I know I raced through a lot of this information. There's so much more that we could go over, but I'd like to really just open it up for a few last-minute questions, if there are any, before we wrap it up.
Diane, I do have one that I saved to the end because it may give us a topic for a future webinar. We had somebody who commented, with companies moving into teleconferencing so much, you know, it's a little hard to imagine the actual sort of body language. And so we're looking for sources to recommend to build presence with executive level people in a teleconferencing environment. And I do think some of these are relevant. I was thinking of some interviews we did here at Bryant lately where we had people by Skype, and clearly the people who looked us in the eyes rather than daz their notes and did some other things. But maybe this is a future topic. We may be able to build it out, but if you have any closing comments on that, or again the links, and then we'll turn it over to Tim to wrap things up. But Diane, do you have any thoughts about the teleconference?
Yeah, and again, I think that we live in a very different world now where, unfortunately, everything's so technical, and we don't have, you know, that opportunity to do face-to-face. It will create a huge opportunity to do a webinar. I don't have any specific resources at hand that I can point you to, but again, when you go back to the overall message that you're trying to convey, whether it's with your brand or your overall executive presence, if you remove the body language, it really comes down to tone, your level of enthusiasm and passion you have for the topic, You know, the words are particularly important, but it's how you convey the message. And if you can't do face-to-face, you need to be looking for ways to have that impact. And it could be with tone, it could be with messaging more in a written format. You know, we're getting further and further away from picking up the phone and talking with people. So you need to be really mindful of the messages that you're sending, you know, electronically through email as well.
So true.
So just in closing, I want to share with you, you know, the best way to achieve your overall executive presence is to make everyone around you feel like he or she is the only person in the room. And Maya Angelou has the quote, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that connects to executive presence in a very big way.
That sounds fantastic. And so on behalf of the Bryant Alumni Association, I'd like to thank Diane and Robin for an excellent presentation. I know I'll be working on my glove handshake after this webinar. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Again, please look for that survey in our email. A copy of this recording as well as the slides will also be in that email. So it's about 1 o'clock, so this concludes today's webinar. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.